Kia ora, everybody. Very warm welcome and a very good morning to you. Richard Clippin here from the Financial Services Council, and absolutely delighted to welcome you to Outlook 2022 with the FMA's incoming CEO, Samantha Barrass. We've just had a really fantastic session earlier this morning and delighted so many people have been able to join us for this discussion. In terms of the run order, I'm just going to invite Rob Flanagan in just a moment to say a couple of words of welcome. We'll then head to a formal karakia welcome from Sharon Bodica. I'll then introduce Samantha, and then the floor will be hers. This is, as all of our sessions, an interactive session. Feel free to use the chat button. Feel free to ask some questions. Samantha will be speaking for 10 to 15 minutes, and then there's going to be a really great opportunity to have a good and broad-ranging conversation together. So without further ado, thank you again. Let me hand over to Rob Flanagan, Chair of the Financial Services Council, to say a few words of welcome. Rob.
Thank you, Richard, and welcome everybody today. And on behalf of the FSC board, we do welcome you all here to our webinar, and where we're going to engage with the regulator today, with a new regulator. So I'm sure you'll all enjoy it. With over 550 odd people, it's quite an audience. So I look forward to the in-depth discussion. So thank you all for attending, and back to you, Richard.
Many thanks, Rob. I'd love to invite Sharon Bodica to welcome us with karakia this morning. This is something we've been doing for most of our big events, and it's just a really fabulous way to ground the conversation and to do it in a trusting and trusted way. And with that, Sharon, thank you. Over to you.
Kia ora. E aroha mai kato katoa. Kia tau nā manakitanga I te mea naro. Ke runga, ke tina o tātou. Kia mahia, te hua mā kihi. Kia toi te kupu, toi te mana, toi te aroha, toi te reo Māori. Kia tūturu, ka whakamoia. Kia tina, homie, huie, tāikie. Tēnā tātou, tēnā rā tātou katoa. Ina te rangatira, aku manu huia, aku manu tāki. Kua hui mai nei, ke tēnei wāhi, ki te tautoki, ina taki. I pai ana, ke tēnei hui me kōrero, FSC Outlook for 2022. Me Samantha Barrass, FMA, tumu whakarai. Sam, nā mai, haere mai. Nō reira, ki mutu taku kōrero e tēnei wā, tēnā koutou katoa. Ko Sharon Bodica taku ingoa, ko o te tumuaki taki kiritaki ni ngā matihiko e AIA. Kia ora, everybody. I'm Sharon Bodica, the Chief Customer and Digital Officer at AIA. I do hope you're not hearing all this construction noise that's going on behind me. But the karakia was a very a welcome to everyone who's joined us today on this important hui and kōrero. And it's really acknowledging our ancestors and past, and how we bring that forward into the conversation today, which I think is so critical for us as the financial services industry, and our connection with Samantha and her important role as tumu whakarai, which is the CEO at the FMA. So it's binding us together, joining us as one, as we seek to acknowledge our past and how we move ourselves forward as a collective too. So with that, I'll pass you back to Richard to continue the conversation. Tēnā koe, Richard.
Sharon. That was fantastic. And Samantha, welcome again. Fantastic to have you with us. Folks, I'll just very briefly introduce Samantha formally. Samantha has extensive regulatory experience. She's been the CEO of the United Kingdom's Banking Resolution Scheme, the CEO of the Gibraltar Financial Services Commission. She's had senior roles in financial regulation. She's also worked in various industry bodies, the FCA, the Financial Conduct Authority in the UK, and in the London Investment Banking Association. Samantha grew up in Christchurch. studied at University of Canterbury and Wellington, has had a spell with the Reserve Bank of New Zealand, and has found her way back to Aotearoa into this role of FMA, the CEO of the Financial Markets Authority. And we are delighted to welcome Samantha to this, her first address to the Financial Services Council's community. And we're so delighted, Samantha, that you've been able to join us, and also so delighted that so many in our community have joined us today, this morning as well. And with that as a scene set, I'm going to hand the baton over to you for some opening comments.
Kia ora, tamare. Good morning. Thank you, Richard. Thank you, Sharon, for the the wonderful karakia. So appropriate, and thank you, Rob, for your introduction. And I'm delighted so many of you are here today. It's, for me, such a positive sign of the strong engagement that the FMA has had, and that I'm looking to have with the industry going forward. So absolutely delighted that so many of you are here. It's a shame we couldn't be doing this in person, so I could be looking at all of your faces in the audience and gauging your reactions rather than the television screen. But that will come very shortly, I hope. When this is the first of much engagement and deep engagement that I'm looking to have with you. So I've been here in the Chief Executive's role for sort of just over a month, six or so weeks, and I'm really grateful to Liam Mason and the team here at the FMA who've kept things going after Rob Everett left last year. And I'm really enjoying reconnecting with Aotearoa and getting to grips with the job. As Richard has outlined, I bring with me rather more decades of experience than I would like to think. But I also spent 20 of my formative years growing up in New Zealand when my family emigrated when I was 7 and started my career here in New Zealand. And, grew up in Christchurch, attended university here. So, I spent, my formative years here in New Zealand. And it's such, the role for me was so attractive because it has given me an opportunity to come back, reconnect with New Zealand, bring my skills and experience to bear in a role that if I could have made a role up for me that would be perfect in New Zealand, it would be, at this point in my life, it would have been this one. So when I first saw the role was coming up and I was talking to my now quite grown up children, their advice for me was to go for it because they could see how much I wanted to be back here and how great the role would be. So what I want to do is today talk about the FMA's purpose, give you a bit of a feel for what's important to me, but it's all around the aspirations that we have for a fair, healthy New Zealand and a financial sector that is really delivering, enabling all the households, all New Zealanders to sort of give them what they need for their lives. And I'm going to sort of touch on that, look at how we're approaching expanding the FMA's mandate, and then I'll spend a few minutes focusing on some of the key priorities in the year ahead. So our purpose is all about ensuring a strong, trusted financial sector that's delivering strong outcomes for New Zealanders, that's doing it fairly and supporting a strong economy. And that's a really good point of departure. In recent years, the world over, governments and regulators have been focusing increasingly on the conduct of financial institutions from the perspective of the outcomes for investors and the consumers and the services they receive. And this, to my mind, has reflected a public sentiment that we really began to see emerge from the global financial crisis, that's more attuned to and less tolerant of adverse outcomes. And in addition, governments and the public are now more likely to expect that financial regulators will provide a much wider focus to their mandate than just harm or risk. In particular, we are seeing in the last few years in particular, but really coming out of the GFC, a strong emphasis on equity and fairness in the provision of an access to financial services. And this has quite profound implications for the work that we will do at the FMA. It means deepening our understanding of the drivers for the choices that are made by investors and consumers, with a particular emphasis on vulnerability. It also means deepening our understanding of what influences and drives firms' business models and their consequent conduct. And the world over, and this was, we were discussing this a bit this morning, conduct regulation has needed to do an important pivot from prescriptive rules compliance to understanding the key interventions and engagements we as regulators need to have to make a difference. What this all means is that I'm really looking forward to working with all of you, to working with the industry to make sure that ultimately people get the financial products and services they need, that they're making the savings for the big things in their life, their retirement, their housing, that they have these services when they need them, and they do what people reasonably expect them to do. And I think it means understanding what people need to make good decisions, know their rights and how to protect themselves, including when they need to look to rely upon the advice of others, including obviously financial advisors. And for me, it's more than just protection. It's about recognizing that through history, the finance sector's role has been a key enabler. It's evolved over time from the early, as we move from bartering to using currency to support trade. The finance sector, the history of the finance sector is one of evolution to support and enable and to make things easier and more effective. And it has enabled the economies we see today. And most importantly today, here in New Zealand, it's about making sure that the finance sector today, tomorrow, and the future is enabling the lives of all New Zealanders. And as a financial market participant, all of you have a huge opportunity. And I know from the conversations I've begun to have how important that is as part of your key vision and the values, that you make the most of your opportunity to make a meaningful difference to people's lives, helping them to build their financial well-being. And I'm really looking forward to getting to know you all and working with you all together on that. Because as a regulator, we want to support you in delivering for consumers. Financial services are delivered by firms and individuals in the sector. They're not delivered by regulators. So it's important that we work with you and that we support you and that we're walking hand in hand together on this. And critically, in Aotearoa, it's about doing it in a way that completely embeds the principles of Te Tiriti, of partnership, protection and participation. And those principles become even more important for us as we move to conduct regulation. So all of this aligns with my own values and why I became a regulator in the first place, particularly having started as an economist at the Reserve Bank of New Zealand. I made the ability of regulation to support and enable was a very attractive career proposition to me and really behind my choice of making that change, if you like. So I'm joining the FMA at a point when it's poised to expand its remit significantly. I'm hugely privileged to have inherited a high-performing, strong organisation. The FMA has done incredibly well in its first 10 years, and it's very humbling to be offered the chance to take it forward into the future. And I think looking at the expanded remit, it's a kind of truism that the reward for doing a job well, as the FMA has done working with all of you for the last 10 years, the reward for good work is that you get given more to do, and hence our expanding remit that you're all very familiar with. And in particular, as you know, we're still bedding in the new licensing system for financial advisors, which will take full effect in March next year. We are in the process of working in a new mandate to regulate conduct in banks and insurers. And from my international experience, I can assure you that we have a real opportunity to do something very different here. And with Reference to my previous comments on the imperative for a regulatory pivot towards the outcomes that matter, we have an important advantage in New Zealand as we go into and face into these new regimes, embedding financial advice, looking at conduct regimes for insurance and bankers, of not coming into it being massively encumbered by the detailed kind of prescriptive input approach of many other jurisdictions. On the financial advice regime, we have an approach in the code that's refreshingly outcome focused. I was delighted to see the code when I looked. I think it goes over about 5 or 6 pages, and it's very outcome focused. And when I look at the pages and pages of detailed prescriptive requirements that pertain to financial advice regimes elsewhere, it gave a real lift, lifted my heart a bit at, being able to work with this here in New Zealand. Looking at COFI, the central requirement in the draft legislation is for firms to establish, maintain, and implement a fair conduct program. And I know that there's more to it than just a simple statement that says establish, maintain, and implement a fair conduct program. But I know that implementing new regulatory regimes brings challenges. But for a central requirement to be grounded in the requirement for a fair conduct program makes it really, internationally speaking, very much of its time, quite possibly ahead of its time, as far as an approach to effective regulation. And talking of leading the world, we're also going to be supervising the new climate-related disclosures regime, the world's first mandated regime. And my challenge is to smoothly implement all these changes while maintaining our current momentum. So, a lot of, I'm going to be eating my Weetabix for breakfast for the next few years, and it's going to mean substantial change for the FMA. It means including building new capabilities, employing new staff with different areas of expertise, and we all know the labour market's tight. Our staff are going to need to develop new skills, and we're going to need to work with you incredibly closely to better understand the new sectors and the business models that we're going to be regulating. Fortunately, I have led a number of organisations through remit expansion and change. I don't underestimate the challenge of it, but I'm really up for it. So, of course, looking at sort of the number of things that we've got underway, so the conduct guide, it's one of the things that's coming over the medium to long term, and I know that you are particularly focused on what's coming down the pipe in the nearer term. I know that you are focused on the burden of broader regulatory changes that you're needing to implement, and we might have a discussion about that sort of later on when we're having the Q&A. But I do want to give you a heads up that we're shortly going to be publishing a draft conduct guide for consultation with a principal conduct regulator, and it is important that we refresh and keep up to date our expectations of what good conduct looks like. We will be updating the previous one, and it will be kind of forward-looking, reflecting the FMA's regulation of banks and insurers. But the guide, of course, obviously applies to the whole financial sector, and it's grounded in 4 principles. The first, most important one, treating customers fairly, good governance and accountability. The third, effective systems, controls and reporting, and identifying and remediating issues. And as I hope you will soon get used to me saying, it's not a prescriptive checklist of do's and don'ts. Rather, it sets out the principles which you as providers need to apply when you're designing products or delivering services to the public. I'd like to think that much of what you see, if not all of what you see in this guide, will be consistent with your own expectations for yourselves on the way that you deliver your products and services. And certainly I'm looking forward to the discussions that we will have on your thinking about the key principles in the conduct guide and the way your business is organised and the way your organisation is governed. It is very important that we get your input into this. As I said before, we're very mindful of the amount of regulation that's open for consultation. So we are going to, provide a 4-month a period of time to provide feedback, which we hope makes it a bit easier to take the time to engage in this guide. Looking to other priorities, the FMA's work continues as usual. Just a few priorities to call out today. On financial advice licensing, we're very much looking to improve and increase the stream of licensing applications that are in March next year. Anyone who's providing financial advice is going to need a full license. We know it's a big change, and our team is always here to help you with any questions. But we are looking for an increase in the number of applications that are coming through. It's going to just be easier for all of us if those don't come in a great big bulk later on in the day this year. We've already indicated that those of you that are looking for a Class 3 license should apply for this before June of this year. That means that we can all have the time to make sure that you've got it in place when you need it for next year. And for Class 1 and 2 licenses, we are looking for September, if we can have those applications in for September. And that's all part of making it easy for all of us to work together to kind of get very, very calm delivery of the new licensing regime. On climate-related disclosures, as I said before, New Zealand's the first country to introduce a mandatory climate reporting regime for listed organisations. This before I left, I had a lot of my contacts, both in regulators and in the finance industry in Europe, were making lots of comments to me about this. They're clearly really interested in what we're doing here. And it is new territory, for us and for you. And we will work very closely with you to guide and support you as we implement these together. And we are aware, the External Reporting Board is going to be releasing its draft standards for consultation very soon. Another area that is very, very important is obviously cybersecurity, cyber resilience. It remains a significant risk across the sector and around the world, and probably has increased given the developments in Europe, in the Ukraine over the last few weeks. And I know it keeps me up at night, and it will keep most of you up at night as well, and with good reason, as I said. The Council of Financial Regulators is establishing a cross-agency community of experts to share information, collaborate, and build on the domestic cyber attack protocols that are already under development. We will be shortly releasing an information sheet outlining things that organisations should really need to think about considering when formulating cyber security plans. As I said before, there are a number of high-profile events which show that none of us are immune, and the threats there. And it's impossible for me to overstate how important it is that we're all gripping this, and we're doing everything we can to get ready, and to be prepared for and ahead of these risks wherever possible. Looking at KiwiSaver value for money, our work as important work on ensuring KiwiSaver members receive value for money continues, and we published some guidance on this last year. We've recently run a pilot with KiwiSaver providers to test a self-assessment tool that's designed to assist with their annual reviews on value for money. It's actually proved quite a useful review of how well providers have been applying principles in our guidance, and we will be publishing the findings in the next couple of months. And I encourage you to kind of look through that, because I think there are some useful guidelines for the sector going forward. On wholesale, we will be taking a look at the wholesale investing sector. These investments are on the edge of our regulatory remit, and we want to better understand who is investing in these products and the level of risk for investors. We're particularly focused on whether and the extent to which vulnerable consumers and people who are in practice retail investors are accessing wholesale markets, and the harm that this may cause them their families. This is really important to me. I would say if there is a continuum in my regulatory career over the last 10 years of things that have made me want to put my head in my hands and weep, it has been the harm that has been caused by people's inappropriate access to markets and products that they simply do not understand, and they go into them without advice and without support and have lost a lot. And this is a very important area to get a grip on. It is the outcome that we must all look for. Is frankly less around, does someone have $100,000 or whatever it is to invest, than genuinely sophisticated, knowledgeable people should be the only ones who are accessing wholesale markets. So as a first step, we've requested information from the industry, and we'll publish this report during this year, and hugely grateful for your engagement in this exercise. So in conclusion, we're a busy regulator. We've got a lot on, and there's a lot of change coming up, but some things won't change. We won't hold back on taking enforcement action where we see breaches of conduct, particularly where, and this is important, where we have put a lot of work and time in to support implementation of new regulatory requirements, and a lot of support, and time has gone by, and we're still seeing important breaches that are causing harm, and so that's going to continue, and we will remain completely connected to the industry. It's absolutely vital to ensure that we understand the issues and practicalities, that we understand the impact of new approaches, we understand where they might have unintended consequences. It's absolutely critical that we remain completely connected to you, and that we're exploring all the variety of ways in which we can make that connection real. My style is to listen, do the utmost to understand perspectives, how it is for you and your experience of our regulatory approach. Really keen to not create unnecessary regulatory burden, welcome feedback, early warning on issues, and ultimately we share the same goals, which is a healthy financial sector that's supporting a strong economy and working for all New Zealanders. Thank you.
Kia ora, fantastic. Thank you, Samantha. That was a tour of many big issues facing us. And folks, for those of you listening, a number of you are already using the Q&A button, so let me encourage you to continue to do that. That'll shape some of the questions I throw to Samantha. But Samantha, perhaps just to start off with, it's fantastic to have a kind of really fresh pair of eyes from another jurisdiction coming into New Zealand. And I guess my first question is, what are your initial observations between the differences to, say, how Europe is regulated and compared to how New Zealand is regulated? And has anything surprised you?
Yeah, great. And I'm actually going to bring my colleague Liam in with this, because I think it's a great question to bring him in on as well, because we've been having some we've been having some sort of fun conversations on me landing here in New Zealand. So some key differences. I mean, obviously, New Zealand is quite late to the party on conduct regulation, and getting that together. As I said, there's an important opportunity there. Key differences. Most of which, some of which I've touched on, are around work being done on perimeter issues. There is a very strong awareness in Europe and the rest of the world on the risks of around the perimeter, and that's not just around the regulated wholesale markets. It's also around cyber and around kind of access to unregulated products and services. And so those are some of the key differences that I would kind of remark on at this point.
Thank you, and welcome, Liam. Hey, look, there's a couple of questions here just around, I'll read it verbatim. So under the new conduct law, does the FMA plan to require fair pricing across a wide range of products and services, not just KiwiSaver? There are a couple other questions. It kind of goes to the heart of the value for money conversation and the kind of focus on fees versus the broader focus. And yeah, a couple of questions on that. Interested in comments.
Yeah, I might actually, Liam, perhaps you can pick up on that.
Well, as you know, Richard, we've already started that with our guidance on value for money, sets our expectation across the managed investment scheme sector. It's going to be increasingly important as our regulation becomes attuned to conduct, and going back to what Sam was saying about the COFI legislation, which has at its heart a fair conduct program. Our proposition when it comes to value for money across the managed investment scheme sector is that if you have an obligation to act in the best interest of your scheme members, then surely you have an obligation to consider the value of the offering that you have to them. And that is a sense that I think will form part of the conduct expectations more broadly. Yeah.
And I think it sort of comes back to the point I made at the beginning, which is what I think we need to look for here is that firms are thinking in a very holistic way over what is needed to deliver fair conduct, and that inevitably means looking at fees, looking at the value for money. And the more that firms can come to that themselves and understand themselves how in the context of their business model they need to really think about how consistent are the fees and the service that's being offered in return for those fees. What would be great from our perspective is that we can see a real engagement in that without us having to tell them.
There's an extension question to that, which roughly talks about the broader value of the products and services that are delivered, so that consumers don't only focus on cheap is best, because with an over-focus on price, all people focus on is cheapest must be best, rather than looking at the kind of more holistic view. Again, interested in any comments on that?
Yeah, and that's a great question, because you're absolutely right. It's around the full offering, and consumers and investors can well end up with a poor outcome and a poor product if the only thing that they're focused on is price. I think what any investor is going to be looking for, and certainly what we're looking for, is that the overall product is worth money. So if more is being charged, that it's genuinely reflective of the service that is being provided.
Fantastic. If you folks are comfortable, I'm just going to scattergun through topics because the questions are coming in on lots of different things. I'm going to head to a really interesting one here. This is a remuneration conversation on balanced scorecards. Samantha, what's your initial views on balanced scorecards for remuneration, given your international experience?
So, look, and this has been an area that has attracted a huge amount of regulatory attention since the global financial crisis. I think the on balanced scorecards, there are some good approaches and there are some less good approaches. I think the outcome is on remuneration, that firms are remunerating their key people, their key executives, who are delivering service in a way that ties them into the longer term the longer term sort of outcome of the product or service that they're selling. So if you're in the market of providing products that have quite a long tail to them, and that the consumers or investors and how they play out may not be felt for quite a long time, then a remuneration that's tied to the longer term outcome is a good way to go, so that you're avoiding the approach of just kind of focused on the immediate sales.
Fantastic, thank you. Just changing tone again. This is a question around the interaction between COFI and FSLA. So the question is, we think that the COFI legislation needs to work well in parallel with FSLA. Otherwise, there's going to be ultimately negative effects on the market and ultimately on clients. How can the FMA work with MB to ensure that good legislation is written?
Yeah, I mean, yes, it needs to be. It's a great question, and I know we're working on this.
Yeah, I mean, the question of intermediaries and how Kofi deals with that and how it interacts with FSLA was a really strong theme through submissions to the Select Committee. We're waiting, like everybody else, for the amendments to be published that come out of that. But one of the things that we've already said is that we are looking to produce guidance specifically on the approach for intermediaries. It's very important to us that these two pieces of legislation work really well. In terms of outcomes, it's very important to us that regulation in this space, in both of these spaces, doesn't inadvertently end up restricting access to advice. It's incredibly important to us, and I know to you as well, that New Zealanders get access to the help that they need to make financial decisions. And it's critical that this legislation enables that.
Probably just an extension, because it kind of goes to the heart of the value of financial advice, doesn't it? Samantha, just interested in your comments, a few questions on this, on your views of the value that financial advice kind of offers to assist New Zealanders making kind of good quality informed decisions.
Yeah. So it's quite, I mean, I start actually from my personal perspective, which is I'm a reasonably well-educated person who's been active in financial markets, worked professionally in financial markets all of my career. And I rely heavily on my financial advisor to provide me with advice. I wouldn't even begin to, I don't have the time, it's the time and the support that I've had from my financial advisor in the UK to help me plan out my investments, and the way that I provide for my children and my household, and I think about things going forward, has just been, incredible. So I think there's, it's around that the value of financial advice is also that I can rely upon him to be completely objective. I know that the advice that he is giving me, because of the regulatory regime in the UK, is completely impartial. It's impartial to the products that I might end up buying, and that is also of enormous value to me. So, and I can't. It's quite hard for me. It's quite hard for me to see that any New Zealander over the age of 18 doesn't need financial advice and support in one way or another. So access to it's really important. Even youngsters, when they're at university, they need to be thinking themselves about how much are they going into debt now, and how is that going to impact upon their aspirations to have families, to save, to buy a house. All adults need, and they can only, education can get you part of the way, but I think we all need advice. I actually personally think we all need financial advice in the same way that we all need a doctor and we all need a dentist. And there is a big gap, in my view, between the advice that we all need and what's actually happening in practice.
Fantastic. I'm going to just again change direction. Lots of lovely welcome messages, Samantha, from right across the question set. This particular question's around crypto. With an increasing focus globally on digital assets, are you bringing any particular international perspective or views to regulation in New Zealand in this area?
Yeah, well, when I was in Gibraltar, at the Gibraltar Financial Services Commission, we actually introduced a regulatory regime for businesses that held themselves, that by way of business, use distributed ledger technology to hold and transfer value. And that experience was an interesting experience. I'm not at all saying that this is how we should go about things here, but what I learned through that process is that, you can't stop the tide of progress. The digital access has just increased in its depth and its breadth. And regulators at first, because they really couldn't understand it, a lot of regulators were not engaging in it. And what you're seeing internationally is an increasing engagement and actually a value when you look at some of the discussions around things like sort of a central bank digital currency, that is looking at the value that they bring. the digitalization, crypto assets, in some, used well, can expand access to financial services. In some of the developing countries, they have supported access, but they've also brought lots of risks with them as well. What I found in Gibraltar is that there's an awareness on the part of those who are developing offer in this, that they're aware that it's a Wild West territory, and there is a value that we developed the regime in Gibraltar because they were looking to provide a means by which they could say we're regulated, so they could differentiate themselves from the poorer players in the market. So I don't have any. I'm not sitting here proposing any new regulatory regimes. There's a lot, in terms of crypto, and Liam, I'm sure, can expand on this. There's ways in which our current regulatory regime is, there's the aspects that are asset neutral as to sort of what the asset is. Already we'll pick up crypto, but apart from to say that it's here, it's staying here, and as regulators we need to engage in it.
Yeah, and it's kind of a very interesting time, isn't it? There's things happening at the perimeter everywhere with the growth of crypto, the growth of online platforms, the wholesale conversation that you mentioned. So it's a pretty interesting but also delicate time. There's a really great question here. This is kind of who does the FMA model its conduct regulation on? And I guess it goes to the heart of the connectivity globally with regulators, and whether we're more like a jurisdiction or less like a different jurisdiction, picking up your comments on some of the mistakes or learnings from other places. Interested in your comments on that one.
Well, Liam might have a perspective. My perception is that where we are starting from, and I'm hoping that any of my UK colleagues who might pick this up at some point don't hang me for this. I kind of think that where we're starting from in New Zealand is where a regulator in the UK might have wished it had started from when it was first starting out. I mean, the UK FCA is incredibly thoughtful, in my view, on how it makes an impact on conduct, and it has been a leading authority when it's come to the use of behavioural economics, understanding how customers make decisions, what is it that can influence on them, it can have an influence on them. And but actually, I think New Zealand is in quite a unique position in terms of the approach to its conduct regime. And as I said before, I think that's a massive opportunity. But Liam, you were here when the conduct regime started. You'll have a perspective on what influenced the approach.
Yeah, and you're right. I mean, aspirationally, it's probably looking at both the experience of the FCA and, with apologies, hoping to avoid some of the trip-ups of the FCA, and particularly as it moved from the square mile to High Street. And the challenges that came with that, but also the developments and the themes that it has developed there ring pretty true for us.
Fantastic. Consumer resilience. Samantha, you spoke a lot about that conversation, and you've seen up close some really bad outcomes on the wholesale side. Financial literacy in New Zealand is one of the things, and one of the dials we're all trying to shift. There's a lot of collective effort on that. I mean, what's your sense about how people learn the language of money from early on around the breakfast table to then make quality decisions through the rest of their lives? And kind of the converse is true as well, isn't it? Interested again on your comments on those.
Yeah, I mean, I'm still quite staggered. I don't know I'm still kind of getting to grips with the New Zealand education regime, but I never cease to be disappointed by the absence in other in other jurisdictions I've been in, the absence of basic financial literacy education in schools. And when I was in Gibraltar, the commission there partnered with the education department, and we did a whole role, we worked with them to roll out a whole kind of curriculum and offer into primary and secondary schools in Gibraltar. And we work, and there is a sort of huge awareness of this issue at the international level. We're very engaged with IOSCO, which is the International Organization of Security Regulators, and the work that they're doing on investor education. In my view, you can make it a conversation. You sort of maybe should be able to rely upon it being a conversation at the breakfast table. It probably isn't. And so it starts from the word go. When I was a little girl growing up, my parents stopped buying my school books and things for me. And from about the age of 8, I had my pocket money that I got was meant to cover actually quite a lot of things, not just the sweets and things that I bought. And that was a very early education for me in budgeting, putting money. I had one of those squirrel post office savings books that I would put money into. And when I look back, that really set me up for life as far as kind of understanding the value of saving and investing. I think it has to start at childhood. And where we don't have that with literacy, we need to be thinking very carefully about how we can interact with the community. By we, I'm meaning I'm not necessarily just talking about the FMA. I'm talking about we, society, those with an interest in having literate, strong literacy. We actually need to be finding out how do we, what are the key ways that we can tap into people. So just sending stuff through letterboxes isn't going to cut it. What are the ways in which people get their information? Who are the community groups that are really important to them, and how can we work through those? How can we work through, citizens? Do we have citizens advice here? Mm-hmm. And so it's being thoughtful on, both education at schools. What are some key things that can be provided at universities and for those who are privileged enough to be able to go to university? What can be done through the workplace? So employers are often, generally, employers are quite a good gateway through to their employees. So it's about just being creative and exciting about how we're going to reach New Zealanders and kind of set up some really basic literacy outcomes that we're looking for, set measures and deliver against them.
Yeah, amazing. Everyone's kind of got their own journey, and it usually starts with something that happened when we were all kids, and someone in our lives suggested something or enforced something or whatever. Hey, just talking about enforcement, and just mindful of time, and thank you for all the questions. Please keep them coming. You spoke a little earlier about enforcement and what the sector can expect from the regulator. And I wonder whether you could just expand on those comments around enforcement being around signalling out bad conduct and encouraging good conduct, but ultimately about confidence for consumers. Wondered if you could paint a bit further on that.
Yeah, I mean, you don't start with enforcement. No one wants to start with enforcement, but it's certainly not where you start when you're introducing new regulatory regimes. I mean, my experience as a regulator tells me that you actually need 99.9999% of your regulated community complying and understanding and being able to deliver against expectations. And it's just like you really want to kind of bring down to the minimum the number that don't. But it is an important aspect to provide confidence around the regulatory outcomes, and it is a tool that we do need to use where we are faced with conduct or behaviour that, despite the work that we're putting in, and often before things come public, there's been a load of stuff that's been going on in terms of our interaction beforehand, and there are consequences that either there's been considerable harm, or we're faced with a can't or won't approach to compliance, in which case we need to do something about it.
Yeah, there was a conversation a little earlier this morning around kind of focusing on poor and bad conduct when it happens, but also finding a way to acknowledge good outcomes when they happen as well. How do you kind of strike the right balance there?
And Liam, you sort of, I know it's been something that's been important to the FMA. It's when the balance, when we see things that are working well, it's being very open about them, and I think it's less of a balance. It's less of a balance than just sort of making sure that we are being very clear when we see things that are working well, and we say it immediately. So the sooner if we see something's working well, if we see a firm or a group of firms are taking a particular approach that we think, wow, that's amazing, we just want to get it out there as quickly as possible, so that others can follow. But Liam, you might have some comments on this.
No, that's exactly right, and it's something that regulator has to turn their mind to, because sometimes the instinct is to focus on the harms, and that is right. But in terms of our job to promote confidence in the market, it's very important that we are getting that message across, and we've tried to do that recently. We've tried to do that in our thematic work, and certainly in relation to the industry's response to COVID through 2020 and 2021. We've been very clear that we've been extremely pleased with the way that the industry as a whole has risen to the challenge.
Yeah, it's been a very effective partnership, certainly if I reflect on the way the entire country, but certainly the financial services sector, including regulators, government, and the sector kind of really pulled together over 2021 and now 22. Look, we've got time for two last questions. Samantha, this is a really good one. New Zealand has a high degree of economic integration with Australia, especially in financial services. What lessons do you see for New Zealand from the Australian experience over the last couple of years, particularly from an FMA/ASIC perspective? And I imagine that's a question to the heart of the Hayne Royal Commission.
Yeah. So I think sort of I'm used to working in integrated financial markets and sort of sharing lessons and working together with other regulators. That has been very much a continuing point in continuing part of my experience as a regulator, and I'm looking forward to the joined up work that we will do with ASIC. I think it is, for example, the conduct and culture, those reviews, those were pretty impactful in Australia, and obviously was something that we were keen to check in with, and has kind of led to the work that we are doing here in New Zealand. It's been interesting for me to see how the Australian experience of that regulatory approach has had an impact both on the industry and us as a regulator. And I think everyone's quite keen to land here when we're bringing in the new conduct requirements. I think we're all quite keen on landing that in a quite comfortable way, that doesn't kind of create that doesn't create a lot of heat and light along the way. I mean, Liam, I know you've been working on this.
It's another area where, in a sense, we've ended up with an advantage. One of the things we called out in the conduct and culture reviews, both in banking and life insurance, was that we thought there was a gap in terms of regulation, and COFI is now looking to fill that, but it's doing it in a way that I think is more outcomes focused than the regime across the Tasman, and I think that's going to be a huge asset in terms of how we implement that alongside the industry. We also have to keep in mind, and we do keep in mind, that what we saw was a different story from what we saw in respect to a number of providers and services in Australia. And some of the challenges that we face in terms of access and participation are different or manifest differently than they do in Australia. So we want to learn what we can from across the Tasman and wider, but remember that we've in the end got to apply it locally.
Yeah, no, that's really heartening to hear all those comments. Samantha, look, last question, probably a reflective one. When you finish your career at the FMA, and noting you've obviously only just started, what do you think are going to be the hallmarks of the things that you've achieved during your tenure?
I'm going to start with the one that's most important to me, which is that as a result of my tenure, working with others, more New Zealanders have confidence that New Zealand's financial services work for them, that we've got a higher engagement, and we have more engagement on the part of consumers. More consumers, they're more tied into, they've got the insurance products they need. They're saving for their homes and their retirement. So those for me are, I'm really kind of focused on the end game, which is financial services that work for all. That a big aspiration for me is that New Zealand is seen to have one of the fairest, if not the fairest, financial sectors in the world. I think we can do that. I think we as a small economy of just over 5 million people with a highly engaged financial sector, that is highly engaged, financial firms and a really good ability to work through. I think that's a fair goal to achieve, and that we've worked really closely with the industry, and that the industry, that you will feel throughout the process that you turn around to me and say you feel listened to. And we haven't always agreed with each other, but you feel listened to, and you've been a part of delivering some really terrific outcomes.
Fantastic. That's a very beautiful way to finish, and there's still lots of lovely welcome comments coming through. I'm going to hand and invite Nigel Jackson, who is Head of Investments at Westpac and also sits on the FSC board and is Deputy Chair, just to do a vote of thanks. So Nigel, if you're there, welcome, and the floor is yours, and then we'll close the session.
Thanks, Richard. Morena koutou katoa. Morning, everyone. Samantha, on behalf of FSC, I'd like to thank you for your address this morning. Your perspective is clearly of great interest to us, as is shown by almost 600 delegates tuning in this morning. And clearly it's a fascinating time to take the helm at the FMA, with a significant regulatory agenda, an expanded remit, and a range of macroeconomic challenges. Your focus on the consumer is really clear, and it's very positive, I think, to hear you talk about the opportunity we have to learn from the overseas experience, the focus on outcomes rather than prescription, and the need for connectedness with the industry. Ultimately, it's about us all collectively delivering outcomes which support trust and confidence to consumers, and in turn support a sustainable industry. And I think these themes are very consistent with the FSC vision, to grow the confidence and wellbeing of New Zealanders. So thank you again for talking to us this morning. Your candour and willingness to engage is very much appreciated. We wish you all the best in your new role, and we look forward to working with you. Back to you, Richard.
Thanks, Nigel. And that also is a very beautiful way to end. Samantha, thank you for taking the time. We wish you all the best in your role. It's been a really great ride on lots of different topics. And if we can help deliver the three things that you're focused on through your tenure, I think it'll be a really productive and collaborative relationship. So thank you again. And Liam, thank you to you and to the whole FMA team, not only for today, but the very engaged way that we work together. To all of you online, thanks for joining in, folks. Thanks for your questions. There's still a range of things coming through. I won't tell you about the upcoming events, but there are plenty of them. But this platform is really about bringing leadership and leading ideas and thinking to the broader financial services community. I think we're all hopeful that we're going to be out of lockdown soon, so we can actually, Samantha, as you said, actually do this in person. And with borders signalled to be opening soon, I'm ever more optimistic that we'll all be able to do that. So on that note, kia ora, have an awesome rest of the week, everybody. Thanks for joining in. And again, Samantha, welcome, and thanks for your time today.
Kia ora, thank you all.
Hello, Richard.
Bye.